Welcome to Esther's Legacy, for we are here for such a time as this. Today we are doing chapter 8 of Esther. I really enjoy doing this chapter, so I want to just kind of dive right in, and I'm hoping that you'll really enjoy it as well. So let's start with verse 1 of chapter 8. Everybody got their Bibles, their notebooks, and their pens? We ready to go? All right, ladies, here we go. That same day, King Xerxes gave the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Esther the queen. And also Mordecai appeared before the king, for Esther had revealed his relationship to her. The king removed his signet ring, which he had taken back from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And then Esther put Mordecai in charge of Haman's house. Remember, the last chapter, chapter 7, ended with the king's anger subsiding. Whether it was anger directly toward Haman, even inward anger toward himself for being taken in by Haman, his anger had subsided. And now he is back in his courtroom, on his throne, and he knows exactly what he wishes to do. It is the same day, okay? The banquet that occurred the night before, it is now the next morning. And in Jewish reckoning, remember, the day starts in the evening. So that banquet the night before was actually the same day as them appearing in the courtroom before Xerxes. He knows exactly what he wants to accomplish. He's calm, and he loves his wife and her family. Those things have been solidified in the mind of Xerxes. And so here we are. Xerxes is giving Esther the property of Haman. And it's important for us to state here that Haman's 10 sons are still alive. So Esther is receiving Haman's estate while Haman's 10 sons are still alive. Okay? So they have been lowered in stature. They have become the tail. Esther and Mordecai have become the head. Remember, we talked about that, right? And that's part of the blessings and the cursings. When God blesses his people, they become the head and their enemies become the tail. And that is what has happened here. Okay? And at the same time, Mordecai is formally introduced to Xerxes as Esther's father, as her adopted father, as her father. And Xerxes at this point takes that signet ring off, the same one he had given to Haman earlier in the book, and gives it to Mordecai. So Mordecai now becomes, in essence, the prime minister of the Medo-Persian Empire. Let that sink in for a minute. Because a couple of chapters before, Haman was going in to try to get Xerxes to kill and hang Mordecai on display. Now it is Haman who has been killed and is hanging on display. And it is Mordecai who has the ring of the king. The signet ring of the king. And Esther, who has been given the estate of Haman, gives that estate, in essence, to Mordecai. She puts him in charge of that estate, which would include the 10 sons of Haman. the very one that their father wanted to put up on the stake. Is now in charge of their father's estate. See, Xerxes went in knowing exactly what he wanted to accomplish. And with Mordecai being formally introduced to Xerxes and the court as her father, and then given that signet ring, this is a Jew who has been made prime minister of the Medo-Persian Empire, while the decree to destroy and annihilate the Jews is still in effect. Why? Because nothing sealed with the king's signet ring can be revoked. Got that? So here we have Xerxes, Esther, and Mordecai all in the courtroom. All right, let's go to verse 3, because something very interesting happens here. Because you would think, because Esther is now seated as queen on the throne of the Medo-Persian Empire within her husband's court, she is there as queen. And yet, there is something that she needs to bring up again that wasn't maybe put on the docket for that day, the day before. So she's going to have to do something very interesting. Verse 3, again, Esther spoke to the king. She fell at his feet and begged him with tears to put an end to the mischief Haman the Agagite had caused by the scheme he had worked out against the Jews. The king extended the gold scepter toward Esther. So Esther got up and stood in front of the king. Her safety has been dealt with. Mordecai's safety has been dealt with. Their authority has been dealt with. But now what about the rest of her people all throughout the kingdom in provinces that are far away from Susa, including back in the land of Israel? What about her people? And so at this point, Esther comes before the queen, gets down off of her queenly throne and comes before her king, falls before him, and begs for the life of her people. And notice why I say that it must have not have been on the docket that day for her to do that, because the king actually has to extend that golden scepter to her again. She is doing this without being on the official agenda of the court that day. She is addressing the needs of her people. And notice Xerxes doesn't miss a beat. He's right there with his wife. He extends that gold scepter because he knows exactly what he wants to do. He knows exactly who he's going to put in charge of the safety of his wife's people. So he extends that gold scepter. She stood up and stood in front of the king, and she says this: if it pleases the king, there's that idea of pleasing and pleasure again. If I have won his favor. Is there any doubt in her mind at this point that she has won his favor? No. And there's no doubt in Xerxes' mind either. She has won the favor of her husband, and she knows that. So why is she saying that? Is she saying that for her benefit or his benefit? Or is she saying that for the benefit of everyone else in that courtroom? I believe she's saying it for the benefit of everyone else in that courtroom. Everyone who knows about that that decree to destroy the Jews, she's letting it be known directly that she has won the favor of her husband, of her king. So if it pleases the king, if I have won his favor, if the matter seems right to the king, and if I have his approval, she knows the answer to all of those statements. She knows she's won his favor. She knows the matter seems right to her husband. Right? And she knows that she has won his approval. I've got some things popping up here I'm going to get rid of real quick. See if they're out of our way. There we go. All right, so she knows the answers to every one of those statements. The people in the room may not be completely aware of what expired the night before, even though they may have woke up and saw Haman sitting, hanging on the stake, and not Mordecai. They might have woke up with some inclination that something big might have went down the night before, but as to the details of what went down the night before, and in terms of what that does for the Jewish people, they may not have known any of that. And so she is letting it be known. She's let it be known who she is, who her father is, and that she has won the approval in favor of her husband, and that everything that happens after this, he knows is the right thing. Her husband knows is the right thing to do. And so she says, then let an order be written rescinding the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews in all the royal provinces. For how can I bear to see the disaster that will overcome my people? How can I endure seeing the extermination of my kinsmen? Her husband knows exactly how she feels about this. The people in the room do not. And if it is the queen who has won his favor and won his approval, that is saying, how can I stand, right? How can I stand, husband, to bear seeing that happen to my people? That's a big clue to the rest of the people in the courtroom. That everything she asked for, she's about to get. Because she may be crying and begging for the life of her people. But she already knows she's won the favor and the approval of her husband. She already knows that her husband has already decided the course of action to take. And she is very comfortable in asking for this request. She did not fear to ask it this time. She did not fear that he might not put down the golden scepter. She did not fear to come before him and beg for the life of her people. Her father is now the prime minister. She is very comfortable in knowing what the answer will be. She is grieving for what her people have been told they have to go through, but she's very comfortable with knowing the answers that are going to come from the throne on this day. She is letting the rest of the people in that courtroom know that you either side with my husband and me and my father, our people and our God, or you will be in trouble. So King Xerxes, this is verse 7. King Xerxes, I'm trying to get rid of something else here. There we go. So King Xerxes said to Esther, the queen, and Mordecai the Jew. Says it to both of them. She's the one making the request, but he speaks to both of them. He says, listen, I gave Esther the house of Haman, and they hanged him on the gallows because he threatened the life of the Jews. That's why I did this. That's why I did this. Can you imagine the other people in the room hearing this? Who may have been and are in complete agreement for what Haman wanted? Uh-oh. You should issue, he's saying, listen, you should issue a decree in the king's name for whatever you want concerning the Jews. And seal it with the king's signet ring, because a decree written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring can't be rescinded by anyone. He knew exactly the advice he was going to give to both of them. He's telling the people in the courtroom, this is why I did this. And so, Esther, Mordecai, let me tell you what you ought to do. I'm going to put this in your hands, and let me tell you what you ought to do, so that there is no doubt in the mind of anyone throughout my kingdom where I stand. No doubt. Xerxes is siding with Esther, with Mordecai, and with the Jews. Much like Rahab sided with the Jews against her people. That's an interesting parallel, isn't it? He is siding with the Jewish people. And he tells Mordecai and Esther to write the decree in his name and seal it with his ring, because anything written in the king's name and sealed with his ring cannot be revoked. Well, that's the way the first one went out as well, wasn't it? Isn't that how the first one went out? That's how the first one went out. Well, does the same thing apply for that one? Yes, it does. But the king has let it be known that Haman was wrong, and that his final decision is to side with the Jews. So now, as we see what's going to happen with Esther and Mordecai and what they are going to do with this decision, we're going to see that the people of the Medo-Persian Empire have a choice. They can either obey decree number 1 or they can obey decree number 2. Either way, they have to obey a decree. Okay? And so this is what happens next. Verse 9. The king's secretaries were summoned at that time on the 23rd day of the 3rd month, the month of Sivan. That's interesting. You remember when the first edict went out? It went out in Susa on Passover. Well, now we are just a little bit past Shavuot or Pentecost. So all of this has taken place in the spring feasts. Through the counting of the Omer, right after Pentecost. Right? We had a discussion earlier about some things taking place during unleavened bread and the counting of the Omer and possibly first fruits. Well, right here, in terms of the hanging of Mordecai, and in terms of the hanging of Haman and the elevation of Mordecai to prime minister, that is happening right after Pentecost. So, these things might have taken a little bit longer than it may have seemed with our discussion earlier. Either way, all of these events have taken place for the most part during Passover and just right after Pentecost. Okay? And so these secretaries were summoned on this day, and a decree was written according to everything Mordecai ordered concerning the Jews. So who's dictating this letter? It's Mordecai. It's the prime minister of the Medo-Persian Empire. It's the most powerful Jew in the world. It's Mordecai. He, in essence, is paralleling the story of Joseph. Do you see it? Joseph was sold into slavery. Joseph was imprisoned. Joseph was forgotten. And then Joseph is elevated to prime minister. Mordecai was as good as dead in the eyes of the world, and certainly in the eyes of Haman. And according to the first decree, he was as good as dead. And all of a sudden, God uses Xerxes to elevate him to be the most powerful Jew in the world, just like Joseph. Joseph was the prime minister of the most powerful kingdom on the earth in his day, and Mordecai is prime minister of the most powerful kingdom on the earth in his day. Their stories parallel tremendously. And so he writes this decree concerning the Jews to the army commanders, governors, and officials of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to each province in its script, and to each people in their language, also to the Jews in their script and language. They wrote in the name of King Xerxes and sealed it with the king's signet ring. They sent the letters by couriers on horseback, riding fast horses used in the king's service, and bread for the royal stock. The letters said that the king had granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and defend their lives and destroy, killing, and exterminating any forces of any people or province that would attack them, their little ones or their women, or would try to seize their goods as plunder. On the designated day in any of the provinces of King Xerxes, namely the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. Remember, this is being written in the 3rd month. So they still have 9 months to go to get ready for this. A copy of the edict was to be issued as a decree in every province and proclaimed to all the peoples. And the Jews were to be ready on the first day to take vengeance against their enemies. Couriers riding fast horses used in the king's service left quickly, pressed by the king's order and the decree issued in Shushan and Susa, the capital. Notice that the decree does not say the Jews have the right to defend themselves in a way that they can go out and attack everybody else and destroy and exterminate and plunder everyone else. No, they have the right to defend themselves, to kill, destroy, exterminate, and plunder anyone who attacks them. This is an order of self-defense. This is not a decree giving permission to attack just everyone else. So for those who attack them, they have the right to defend themselves and to do exactly what their enemies wanted to do to them. Which is very interesting. Because according to the Torah, do you remember, ladies? According to the Torah, when someone bears false witness against someone, and that is proven, then the innocent party has the right to do to the one who accused him exactly what his accuser wanted to do to him. And that is what principle we're seeing played out here in the book of Esther. We are seeing a biblical, a law-abiding, Torah-abiding principle played out here in the Medo-Persian Empire with Esther and Mordecai and the Jewish people. Very interesting, isn't it? And so this decree goes out, and it is spurred on by the order of the king. The king saying, you get this out there as quickly as possible. Go. Ride my fastest horses. Take it as quickly as you can. The Jewish people need to know that I am on their side. That their God is for them. That their God has saved them once again and redeemed them once again. They have to know. Get the word out. And so he spurs them on to do this as quickly as possible. And then we come to verse 15. Meanwhile, Mordecai left the king's presence arrayed in royal blue and white. Mordecai, the prime minister of the Medo-Persian Empire, is also standing in the place of his people. He is dressed and arrayed in their colors. He is dressed, he is arrayed in the colors of blue and white, the colors of Israel, the colors of the tzitzit, the colors of Israel. That is what he's arrayed in. He is standing there as a proud Jew, a proud Israelite, standing in the place of his people, there to defend his people. And the king is by his side. So he's there in the blue and the white, but he's also wearing a large gold crown and a robe of fine linen and purple. He is dressed as royalty. He is the queen's father. He's prime minister of the Medo-Persian Empire. And he is the most powerful Israelite on the planet at that time. And he is standing in the place of his people. And let me ask you this. What does God want to do for his people? Does he want to array them in fine linen? Does he want to put a crown on their head? Yes. Yes. We see here again, over and over throughout this book, we see God's hope and God's plans for his people. We see God's love for his people, his desire to see his people elevated to their proper place as his wife, as his people, as his children. Royally dressed. Israel, royally dressed. That is what we see in this picture of Mordecai. Don't let that escape your eyes. Ladies, this is a beautiful, beautiful picture. We as Gentiles have been grafted into that family. And we're going to see the importance of that here in just a minute. But let us remember that God's covenants, his promises, first went out to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to the nation of Israel, and that mixed multitude at the mountain that became Israel, the nation. His covenants, his promises, they are better than the sweetest and richest foods. And we're seeing God give his people a glimpse of what he wants for them right here. His people are arrayed in their royal colors and the crown of gold, the fine linen, and the purple. They are a royal priesthood. They are Israel, his people. And the city of Shushan, the city of Susa, shouted for joy at seeing Mordecai arrayed in that splendor. The people of Susa rejoiced. For the Jews, all was light, gladness, joy, and honor. As that word went out, their hearts that were so heavy before are now light. They are full of joy where they were full of grief. They are full of gladness where they were full of sadness. And they are full of honor where they had been full of shame. So not only do we have a total reversal for Mordecai, actually, Esther and Mordecai, but specifically Mordecai, but we also see a total reversal for the people, even out in the provinces. Their entire countenance changes. Reminds me of when David says, "Why are you downcast, O my soul?" Their souls had been downcast. They were being put to shame. They had been saddened. They were grieving. They were heavy-hearted. And now everything has changed. Everything has reversed. In every province and city where the king's order and decree arrived, the Jews had gladness and joy, a feast and a holiday. As soon as they got the word, they spread the news and they celebrated. They were celebrating their redemption because they thought they were dead. They thought it was over and only God could make a way. They get the news that God has made a way, and what do they say? It is time to celebrate. It is time to honor our God. It is time to honor the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, our God, who sits on the heavenly throne. They could not wait to celebrate when they got the news. It saddens me that so many believers, ladies, I'm sure you've heard people say things about Purim and not celebrating Purim, even though they may celebrate, even those within Messianic life who may celebrate the feast of Leviticus, but they don't celebrate the feast of Purim or Hanukkah. And I'm like, why? My heart grieves when I hear that, because God moved for his people, and that deserves celebration. That deserves celebration. If God had not spared his people through what he does here in the book of Esther, through Purim, there would have been no Yeshua. The line would have been destroyed. They would have all been gone. But God made a way. All is lost, but God made a way. He turned shame into honor. He turned them from the tail to the head. He turned the curse into blessing. Let us not make light of that. Ever. Because do you remember what Mordecai said to Esther? Back in chapter 4. He told her that if you do not do this, Esther, that relief will come through some other means. Right? And that relief, that word relief in that statement means enlargement. God will enlarge his tent by another means if you do not act. Interestingly enough, the very next statement speaks of that enlargement. Many from the peoples of the land of the Medo-Persian Empire became Jews because fear of the Jews had overcome them. I'm going to ask a very simple question. Were they afraid of the Jewish people? Yeah, I'm sure they were. It says they were. But I'm going to ask this very important question. Who is the fear of the Jews? Is it not God himself? Is it not God they are truly fearing? What the God of the Jews would do? And interesting, if you remember from back in Genesis, we have with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What I have always found very interesting is that when it comes to Jacob and his relationship with God, it calls God the fear of Isaac. The fear of Isaac. So the fear of the Jews is the very one who is the fear of Isaac. They feared the Lord Almighty, the fear of the Jews. And so many of them became Jews. They took upon themselves the mantle of the Jewish people, the burden of the Jewish people, the God of the Jewish people. And even though this was a very short-lived revival, so to speak, I'll explain that in just a minute. For this generation, it was very real. They had to go, in those next 9 months, they had to make that decision, and they had to become Jews. Let that sink in for a minute. It wasn't just a matter of saying when, around it, oh yeah, I'm a Jew. I'm a Jew. Yeah, I'm a Jew. It wasn't a matter of just saying something. It was a matter of becoming something. Their entire life, their entire perspective, their entire religion had to change. And this had an impact for this generation, and may have even had a very powerful impact on Xerxes himself. He too might have become a Jew for fear of the Jews. And why do I say that? I have historical reasons for saying that. First, let's back up. We know that it was a short-lived revival and only a generation long, because the very next generation, with Ezra and Nehemiah and Artaxerxes, the son who succeeds Xerxes' son who succeeds him, when Esther and Nehemiah go back, remember Ezra and Nehemiah go back. Ezra tells his people to put away the foreign wives. Because even though they might have married into families that had converted, the children were not living in that conversion. Okay. Also, for some reason, Artaxerxes felt the need to solidify Zoroastrianism within the kingdom of the Medo-Persian Empire. It is under Artaxerxes' reign that Zoroastrianism becomes the official religion of the empire. Why did he feel the need to do that? We'll talk about that a little bit more another time, because it's a very interesting topic. But that happens under Artaxerxes. Could it be that his father had turned away from Zoroastrianism and sided with the God of the Jews? Because we know right here he's siding with the God of the Jews. Did he do that on a personal level as well, like Rahab did? There are some indications that that might have been the case. And I do want to get into that, and I'll probably get into that next time, because it's very important actually for the understanding of the book of Esther and for understanding Xerxes and subsequent books that occurred in the lifetime of his son with Ezra and Nehemiah. But either way, we have God reaching out to the peoples of the Medo-Persian Empire and saying, come be a part of my people. Just like he gave those in Egypt an opportunity to put blood on their door, over their doorposts, right? On their doorposts. An opportunity to leave Egypt with his people. So he reached out to the Egyptian people. He reached out to the Egyptian people even with Joseph being the prime minister of Egypt. But definitely when he redeemed his people out of Egypt. We see him doing that with Assyria, in the kingdom of Assyria, through Jonah. And the whole capital city of Nineveh repented. We see God reaching out his hand to the Babylonian people through Nebuchadnezzar, when Nebuchadnezzar declares that God is God alone. So all throughout history, even within pagan empires, we see God reaching in and pulling out some for himself. And doesn't Scripture say that in the end, who will make up his people? People from every tribe, tongue, and nation. And here we see God enlarging his tent with the peoples of the Medo-Persian Empire through the events that occur in the lifetime of Esther and Mordecai. This is no small book. This is no small book. This is huge. This book is the gospel. If we truly understand what God is relating to his people through the account of Esther and Mordecai, we understand that what he is doing is the gospel of the kingdom. And just like at the end of days, before Yeshua returns, it will look like doom and gloom for the people of God. God will reverse that. He will send his son arrayed in royal robes and in the finest of linen, crowns on his head, royalty on his royal horse to save his people, to redeem his people, to gather his people once again. This story is the story of the kingdom. If beauty pageant, it is the gospel of the kingdom. And we as believers, ladies, need to rejoice. Ruth. The same story is being played out here in the book of Esther. And so I want to encourage you that next year at Purim, I hope that it is even more of an exciting time than it was this year. If you didn't celebrate Purim this year, really consider celebrating what God does for his people. Celebrate the gospel of the kingdom. Celebrate the resurrection that he gives. These people were as good as dead. And in essence, this decree raises them from the dead. It is, in a sense, a resurrection, which makes me wonder more and more and more. You know, the book of John, in the book of John, you have every single feast. I believe chapter 5 of John is actually Shavuot or Pentecost. But and with that, you see every single feast, really, you know, the pilgrimage feasts within the book of John. You even have Hanukkah. But one thing that I find very interesting that is between Hanukkah and between Passover, that Yeshua raises Lazarus from the dead. And he's right there in the vicinity of Jerusalem again. I can't help but wonder, did he raise Lazarus from the dead on Purim? When God's people, in essence, were raised from the dead? I can't help but wonder. I hope this study has been a blessing to you. I'm going to end it now. We'll get into chapter 9 tomorrow. We'll get into, or I'm sorry, not tomorrow, next week. We'll get into a little more of the history of the end of the kingdom. next week as well, the end of the Medo-Persian, or not the end of the Medo-Persian Empire, but the end of Xerxes' reign, because it's very important how his reign ends. And so I just want to say I hope this has been a blessing for you. I love you, ladies of Restoration. I love you more than you know. I love you. And I pray that y'all have a blessed day. Shalom.